it's time for another installment of Grindhouse Purgatory, and I just went down memory lane the other night because I had dug out a film I hadn't seen in quite some time. When I saw it originally, I believe it was 1976, the name of the film was The Death Collector. It was a mob movie shot basically in Soprano land, and a lot of the dialogue in this movie you would hear in the Sopranos TV show on HBO, I don't know, maybe, 30 years later? But anyway, the real point of this movie is that it showcased the talents of two guys who were actually a lounge act in the Bergen County nightclubs. I believe one of the places they performed was called the Point After. And these two people would be Joe Pesci and Frank Vincent. And the lead in the film is Jerry, played by Joseph Cortese. And the film opened up with Jerry in bed with a mobster's wife, and somehow he bluffs his way out of it. He goes to see this godfather, Tony, who chastises him for, disappearing and being out, and tells him, I know you're looking for work, but I have other guys that have families to feed, so you're sort of on the back burner until I can come up with something you can do. So Jerry goes to a social club where he runs into this guy, Joe, played by Joe Pesci. And Joe Pesci has some kind of score that he wants to set up. It's a supermarket robbery. But his buddy Butchie, who was going to do it with him, ran afoul of the New York mob, and were treated to a scene of Butchie being beaten, then shot, then dumped in a hole, and then covered with asphalt. So you don't fuck with the New York mob. So Joe wants Jerry in on this with his cousin Sergio, who's a little bit dim, but Sergio took a huge beating and never told anybody where Butchie was hiding, so they found Butchie out himself. So Joe is also bitching about how some people in this room owe him money, this and that and the other thing, and he points out this one guy, and he goes, well, this guy owes you like $400, why don't you collect? And he goes, well, his uncle's so-and-so, this and that, connected. So Jerry gets in this guy's face and calls him a cheapskate and shit. Of course, this runs right back to his uncle, which runs right back to Tony. Tony's a little pissed off, but, Jerry tells, Tony, this kid's a douchebag welcher and shit like that. So he makes Jerry make a phone call and basically apologize to the guy. And, Jerry has to slip in, well, your nephew is a moke anyway. And the guy laughs, so, okay, everything's cool. So Tony gives Jerry the job of collecting, I think it's $27,000 for this Mr. Green from a guy named Bernie. Bernie is Frank Vincent. Bernie doesn't want to pay. So Jerry goes to visit him. Of course, Jerry has a gun, which he pulls on him, which doesn't go over too well. So there's a bunch of shit going on, and finally Bernie agrees to pay, but has a guy sitting in his office when the payoff is made. So when Jerry pulls up at a stoplight, this guy pulls up next to him and empties a gun into his car, wounding Jerry, but he thinks he killed him, takes the money and takes off. So now Jerry goes back to his girlfriend's house to be patched up, and Tony comes over really pissed off about, how did you lose the money? How did this happen? How did that happen? He's not happy with him, and he tells him basically something's got to be done. Well, what has to be done is Jerry's a little fucking pissed off, even with a shot up arm, tracks down Bernie in the rain, hits him with a bat, lays him on the ground, puts a branch under his leg, and then breaks his leg with the bat. So now Jerry's real pissed off and decides to put a contract out on Jerry and Mr. Green. He gets this black hitman and sends him after the two of them. Well, he's watching Jerry, but Mr. Green is easier, so he poses as a client, goes into where Mr. Green has his business, is escorted into Mr. Green's office by this hot black secretary, and he blows Mr. Green away and blows the secretary away and just walks out like nothing happened. In the interim, Tony has told Jerry that he wants him involved with this heist that Joe wants to plan. Jerry will do it, only Jerry's calling the shots. So, interestingly enough, the supermarket they're going to rob is the Stop and Shop in Lodi, New Jersey on Route 46. A scant few miles down the road will be the future home of the Bada Bing Go-Go Bar for the Sopranos. So they set this whole thing up because this guy leaves at a certain point every day with a paper bag that could have anywhere from $40,000 to $70,000 in it. They disable his car. He's in the car. Of course, Joe has to do the robbery. Jerry disabled the car, and Serge is the getaway driver. Well, the guy don't want to give up the money, so in typical Joe Pesci style, Joe beats the shit out of him, beats him bloody, and leaves him there. So they take off with the money. Well, the hitman sees this thing and is following them to this hotel. Now, while Joe and Serge are talking about their future in a room, Jerry's downstairs getting some food. The hitman sneaks in, is waiting follows Joe as Joe leaves the room to get a bucket of ice. Goes back to the room while Sergio is changing and shoots Sergio when Sergio has his shirt over his head, shoots him in the face, takes the money and leaves. Jerry gets back in there, finds the both of them dead, and is understandably perturbed and goes to Tony. Tony says to him, now, okay, you had $27,000, you lost that. He goes, how much was the heist from the supermarket? He goes, we counted it, it was like 40-something thousand. He goes, well, the news says it was $60,000. He goes, the news said is wrong. Now Tony goes off on him saying, all this money slips through your hands, how am I supposed to do anything, this and that, and the other thing? Well, Jerry makes a big fucking mistake because he basically calls Tony a fucking pimp and leaves thinking everything's okay. Everything isn't okay. Well, he tracks down the hitman who's going to an armorer who works out of the Meadowlands, and there's a confrontation in the swamp, and Jerry had already gone to the guy who would set up the contract with a sawed-off shotgun and put it under his chin and tells him, I want the name of the guy who fulfilled the contract or I'm going to blow your head off. All right, so he has this, basically corners this guy and blows him away with the shotgun. Whatever happened to the money is gone. But prior to this, his girlfriend was looking for a camper. And Jerry went to this scrapyard called SARS Auto Wrecking, which I know well because I did business there when I was a mechanic. It's located in the ass end of the Meadowlands where the swamps were, and obviously it ain't there anymore. So he tells Gus that he wants this camper. Well, after he blows away this hitman, he goes back to his girlfriend. He gets a phone call from Gus saying that I think I have the camper that you want. All right. So he goes to the junkyard. Gus leads him to a little far away from everybody else area where there's a bunch of wrecked cars, and in the middle of this thing is this beat up camper. So as Jerry's checking this out, Gus backs away. All of a sudden, you see this huge guy in a pink shirt. He looks like Frank Zappa on steroids. You see this other guy come out of a trunk of a car, and this other guy pop up with an automatic rifle. And they start blowing Jerry to bits. Pretty bloody scene for, an independent film because he's laying in the mud. Pieces of him are flying off, and they keep shooting him. Well, here's the fucked up situation. Not only did I recognize the scrapyard, I recognized two of the hitmen. One of them was a guy named Perry, who owned a bar in Lyndhurst called the Poorhouse. And Perry was kind of, I would say, a connected guy because when my parents went out to Las Vegas, all Perry had to do was make a phone call. They didn't pay for any of the shows. Also, he was the kind of guy that if you had a car that was giving you problems and you wanted to collect the insurance on it, you got a hold of Perry, and Perry would make it go bye-bye. The other guy, Steve, was this big drug dealer, big tough guy, drug and gun dealer who was a problem in the area. What happened was Steve pistol whipped somebody and got arrested and got thrown into jail. And he was one of those guys that was real tough on the outside, but once on the inside, he couldn't do time. And all of a sudden, he started talking. And he got out, and the word was put out, don't tell this motherfucker anything. Okay, so here we have this big shootout. They throw Jerry's body into the trunk of a Cadillac Eldorado. They drive down the Meadowlands, and you're getting a good scenery thing because you can still see the Twin Towers. You see the turnpike. You see everything. And while Tony watches from, a vantage point with his car, they basically just toss Jerry's body into the swamp. Now, it's a good movie. It's a good mob movie, and it's like a precursor. Fuck it is, you know what I'm talking about. to The Sopranos, because they used that area to do a lot of the shooting down there, and a lot of the dialogue, like get out of here, forget about it, shit like that, all came from this movie. So about 2 days after I see this movie, I run into Perry and I go, bang, you're dead. And he goes, oh, you saw it? And I go, yeah. He goes, it was cool. Oh, yeah, well, I knew somebody was involved, and, they wanted a couple guys to be hitmen, so I rounded up some of the guys, this and that and the other thing. The odd thing about it was, when the credits rolled, it says the 3 killers, and none of them used their real name. And I looked on the IMDb, and again, none of them used their real name. Well, what happened was, Steve was basically taken out about 2 miles from my house. He was left in the parking lot of the Holiday Inn down there. Story I got was he was fed a handful of his own drugs, and a quart of vodka was forced down his throat, and they left him in his car to die. Yeah, so this is one of those things where life imitates art, or art imitates life, because the hitman actually got hit. Very strange, set of circumstances. As far as I know, I never knew the third guy with the automatic rifle, but Perry, as far as I know, is no longer with us. He retired years ago and moved down to Florida and passed away. So it was interesting living in that area, because you ran into, this cast of characters, and there was a lot of mob influence in that area, and, you just took it with a grain of salt, because that was part of life living there. So, unfortunately, the death collector fell into public domain, has been released as the enforcer and family enforcer. Even on one of those PD labels, it still plays out pretty good, and it's worth a look. So, like I said, 1976, The Death Collector, definitely worth a look. And like I said, weird backstory, because life imitates art in the whole thing. So again, here we are. It's March 3rd. We're still in the pandemic. Yours truly just registered to get vaccinated, so hopefully I'll get that done soon. But until then, please be careful, mask up, stay safe. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. And that's all we got for today. So we'll see you on the flip side. Take care.